My father handed me a glass of sparkling water, the kind he keeps for guests he's trying to impress, and steered me toward the sliding door to the back deck with one firm, practiced hand on my shoulder. "The Hardings will be here any minute," he said quietly. "It'll be less complicated if you give them a bit of space to settle in." He was already smiling at someone across the room before he finished the sentence. That was the whole thing. Less complicated. That was me to him. A complication. And standing on that cedar deck in the October chill, listening to laughter float through the glass door I wasn't allowed to use, I realized I'd driven 4.5 hours down the 401 for this. I'd left my apartment in Ottawa at 6 in the morning, stopped at a Tim's outside Kingston, rehearsed every version of "this time will be different" until the words stopped meaning anything. And now I was outside, holding a glass of fizzy water, watching my family celebrate my brother through a window. The party was for him. My brother had just made associate partner at Harwick Engineering, one of the most respected structural engineering firms in Ontario. I was proud of him, truly. But I'd known, somewhere in the part of me that keeps track of old wounds, that pride and welcome were not going to be the same thing tonight. The backyard in Oakville looked the way my parents' things always looked, arranged for an audience. String lights between the maple trees, a long table with pressed white linens, chrysanthemums in terracotta pots along the fence. The Hardings arrived through the side gate with a bottle of Niagara ice wine, and my father went to meet them with his hands extended, and his whole face open, the way it opens for people whose opinion of him actually matters. I sat on the steps and watched. At some point, my mother came to the glass door. She saw me. Her hand lifted slightly, not quite a wave, not quite a signal to come in. More like the reflex of someone who spotted a problem and wasn't sure what to do with it. Then she turned back into the warmth and the wine and the conversation. I looked through the glass and saw what was on the mantel. A new photograph. Large, studio-framed, the kind you have printed properly and matted and shipped in a flat cardboard box. My father, my mother, and my brother, standing in front of this house in their good clothes. It looked like Christmas. I'd been home for 4 days last Christmas, and in those 4 days, I don't remember anyone mentioning a portrait session. That photo had been taken after I left, or it had been taken carefully, deliberately, when I was most else in the house. Either way, the message was the same. 3 people in the frame. That was the family now. That was the official version. I had grown up in that house. My name was still technically on the deed, somewhere in some old document no one had thought to update. But I was not in the picture. They hadn't just failed to include me. They had waited. Replaced the gap I'd left with a cleaner image, a tidier story, one that didn't require any explanation. The image of the 3 of them, smiling in the cold light, the house wreathed in Christmas white behind them, cracked something open that the October air and the sparkling water hadn't managed to touch. I've never been easy to their story. I understood that much, even if I spent years not wanting to understand it. And standing on that deck, the old question came back the way it always does eventually. How does doing the right thing become the worst thing you ever did to your family? The answer didn't live in that backyard. It lived in my father's office at Harwick Engineering 7 years ago on a Tuesday afternoon in March that smelled of coffee going cold and something else. The particular staleness of a room where decisions have already been made before you walk in. I had been a junior structural engineer at Harwick for 3 years by that point. My father hadn't gotten me the job. I need to be clear about that. I'd applied through the standard process, been interviewed by a panel he wasn't on, and been hired on the strength of my degree from Dalhousie and my co-op record. That mattered to me. I had done it properly. Harwick was working on the tender for a pedestrian bridge over a river gorge in a regional municipality northwest of Toronto. Not the largest contract the firm had ever chased, but high profile, the kind of project that gets photographed and referenced and added to a firm's official story. My supervisor on the project was a senior engineer named Blackwood. He had 15 years at the firm, a way of speaking that made everything sound like a pronouncement, and a total certainty that his instincts were better than other people's numbers. In the 3rd week of February, I was reviewing the load distribution calculations for the bridge's central span. I ran them 3 times because the numbers weren't sitting right. The preliminary soil reports showed a clay layer about 4 meters down that hadn't been properly reflected in the foundation depth assumptions. Not dramatically. Not the kind of thing that leaps off the page in a first read. But in certain weather conditions, a hard freeze followed by rapid thaw, the kind that happens in southern Ontario every spring without exception, the soil behavior would diverge from what the model assumed. The variance was within the tolerance margins if you looked at it Blackwood's way. I didn't think it was within reasonable margins. I thought it was a problem that would compound over years, invisibly, until it wasn't invisible anymore. I wrote it up, formally with citations, with my revised calculations attached. I submitted it to Blackwood and asked for a meeting. He didn't have the meeting. He sent an email that said my concerns had been noted and reviewed. He didn't change the calculations. I went to the project director. I put my concerns in writing again, explicitly, and asked for the issue to be escalated to the senior review team. I was told that Blackwood had already logged it as resolved at the team lead level, that the matter had been registered and addressed. It didn't feel addressed. It felt buried. 2 weeks later, I went directly to the firm's chief structural reviewer, bypassing Blackwood entirely, and handed over every document I'd generated. I explained what I'd found. I asked him to look at it fresh. He did. 3 days after that, the project was paused for an independent soil review. The independent review confirmed the clay layer issue. The foundation design was revised. The bridge eventually got built, 2 months behind schedule, with a modified foundation that cost the contractor an additional $300,000. And I was called into my father's office. The room was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when someone has decided to let silence do the heavy work. My father sat behind his desk. Blackwood stood to one side. A senior partner I recognized from the firm's lobby photo stood near the window. Blackwood spoke first. He gave a calm, methodical account of a junior engineer who had become personally fixated on a minor discrepancy, who had repeatedly undermined the chain of review despite being reassured by qualified supervisors, who had gone to external channels in a way that embarrassed the firm and cost the contractor significant money. He said I had created an atmosphere of distrust on the project team. He said the escalation had been unnecessary because the issue was already being monitored internally, a fact I had apparently lacked the patience to wait for. He said all of this in the measured tone of a man who had prepared it carefully, and none of it was true. My father did not look at me once while Blackwood spoke. When Blackwood finished, my father picked up a pen, turned it over twice in his fingers. Then he looked at me, and in that look I found nothing of the man who had taught me to read topographic maps at the kitchen table when I was 9. His eyes were professional. Closed, somewhere that had nothing to do with me. You put this firm in a difficult position, he said, regardless of the technical outcome. The technical outcome was that the bridge design was corrected, I said. The technical outcome was that a client relationship is damaged and a senior engineer's judgment has been publicly questioned by someone 3 years into her career. He set the pen down. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk, a voluntary resignation form. Beside it, a non-disclosure agreement. I'd like this handled quietly, for the firm and for this family. I looked at the paper for a long moment. I found a real problem, I said. It was fixed. The way you chose to act created problems that weren't there before. He pushed the pen closer. Sign it. Personal reasons. No specifics. You'll have a clean departure and a positive reference for contract work outside Ontario. Have you ever felt the specific weight of being told that what you did right is the thing that has to be hidden? That the correction, the actual prevention of harm, is the inconvenient part? I picked up the pen. My hand was completely steady, which surprised me. The steadiness felt like the last of something draining out quietly, somewhere I couldn't see. I signed my name. I drove north on the 400 without knowing where I was going. I ended up staying with an old university friend in Barrie for 3 weeks, sleeping on a pull-out couch, working early morning shifts at a bakery on Dunlop Street to cover the transit pass and throws of groceries I insisted on contributing. The smell of flour and the warmth of proof ovens became the smell of those weeks. Every morning at 4:45, before the rest of the city was moving, I would stand in that bakery and feel the gap where my career used to be. The shame was its own weather system. Low grade, constant, the kind that doesn't announce itself dramatically but just settles in and changes the light. I had done the right thing. I had been punished for it. And from the outside, the official version was the only version visible. A junior engineer who couldn't work within a team structure, who had trouble with authority. My father had made sure of that. He had the relationships. He knew how these things moved. I stopped applying to Ontario firms after the third rejection. The reference was technically clean, but the industry is not large, and reputations travel faster than formal documents. I relocated to Ottawa. I had a contact there, a woman I'd met at an engineering conference in Montreal who ran a small independent consultancy doing review work for federal infrastructure projects. She needed someone who could read a geotechnical report at 3 a.m. and catch what others missed. I could do that. It was, in fact, the only thing I was certain I could still do. Her name was Dr. Mercer, and she was the first person in my professional life who operated entirely without pretense. She didn't promise me anything she wasn't prepared to deliver. She paid me contract rates, gave me her honest opinion of my work, and once, after a project that had pushed us both well past any reasonable limit, she closed her laptop and asked me a question no one in my field had ever asked. "You're very good at this," she said, "but you look like someone who hasn't decided whether it's worth it yet. Is it?" The question caught somewhere I wasn't expecting. I sat with it for a moment. "I don't know yet," I said finally. "That's an honest answer," she said, and she opened her laptop again and we went back to work. It sounds small. It wasn't small. In that moment, in a way I didn't have language for until much later, she gave me the permission to be in process. To be unfinished, to be worth taking seriously before the verdict on my own life was in. Over the next 4 years, I rebuilt quietly without fanfare in the unglamorous back end of federal infrastructure work. I reviewed designs other people had submitted. I caught things. I wrote careful, precise recommendations that went into binders, that went into offices, and mostly never got publicly credited to anyone. I was good at being invisible, which is a different skill from being good at engineering, and I had developed it out of necessity. 18 months ago, I was brought in as the lead independent reviewer on the Queenston Crossing rehabilitation, a 140-year-old railway bridge over the Niagara River Gorge that the federal government and the province of Ontario had jointly committed to preserving as a working structure. It was the largest project I had ever touched. The original engineering was Victorian-era craftsmanship that had been patched and repatched through 3 generations, and what the preliminary assessment missed was a failure pattern in the secondary truss connections masked by decades of newer steel cladding. I found it. We redesigned the rehabilitation approach entirely around it. The revised plan saved the project from a structural failure that would have occurred within 8 years and cost, conservatively, close to $400 million to remediate. The project director, a man named Mr. Gallant, who had spent 25 years in federal public works and who operated with the particular ease of someone who had never been particularly impressed by rooms like the ones my father collected, shook my hand at the final review meeting and said, "You changed what this project was going to be. I want that on the record." I drove home to Ottawa that evening and ate leftover soup at my kitchen table, alone, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not triumph. Closer to rightness, the quiet sensation of a thing having been done properly and of having been the person to do it. I didn't tell my family. I hadn't told them anything about the Queenston project, or about most of my work in the years since I'd left Harwick. My mother sent texts at Christmas. My brother and I had a rhythm of brief, careful calls, catching up without going too deep. My father and I hadn't spoken in nearly 2 years. Until November, 6 weeks before the party. He called on a Wednesday evening, the home number from Oakville. I almost let it go to voicemail. "I've been hearing things," he said, without greeting. My father had always treated openings as a concession. "About a federal bridge project. Your name has come up in conversations I'm having with people at Infrastructure Canada. I'd like to know what you've been doing." "Working," I said. "Don't be flippant." The controlled sharpness in his voice was the sound of anger on a very short lead. You have no right to be operating in spaces that cross into this firm's client relationships. If you're positioning yourself as a competitor, I'm not a competitor, I'm a reviewer, and I haven't been anywhere near Harwick's client list. Then why is your name on a federal project that Mr. Gallant is referencing in meetings with provincial partners that this firm is actively courting? There it was. Not concern, not curiosity. The thing he actually cared about, the proximity of my name to his professional territory, and the fact that I had wandered back into it through sheer competence, without his knowledge or permission. My name is on that project because I did good work on it, I said. That's how it works. You are embarrassing everything this family has built. And then, quieter, the way he goes quiet when he means to be final. I have relationships at PEO and at the federal level. Do not make the mistake of assuming that whatever you've cobbled together can survive scrutiny. I ended the call. For a long time, I sat with the phone in my hand. The threat was real. He did have those relationships. But what broke open in me in that moment wasn't fear. It was something older and simpler. The recognition, arriving with a kind of exhausted clarity, that he had never once asked what had actually happened on that project 7 years ago. Not once. He hadn't asked what I'd found, whether I'd been right, what the independent review had concluded. He only ever asked about his reputation, his firm's standing, his family's name, which apparently still included me when it needed protecting and excluded me when the photo was being taken. My brother called 2 days after I received the party invitation. He'd been told enough about the phone call to be unsettled. He said, "You've been working on something significant," my brother said. He wouldn't tell me what. "The Queenston Crossing," I said. "Federal infrastructure review. I've been doing this kind of work for 4 years. A pause. "I've heard that project mentioned in our firm meetings." "I know." A longer pause. "Gemma," he said, "what actually happened 7 years ago?" "I was told you'd had difficulty integrating with the team, that you'd gone around your supervisor without sufficient cause." "Without cause," I said. I thought about the clay layer, the freeze-thaw cycle, the $300,000 in foundation redesign. The independent soil review confirmed what I'd flagged. The foundation was corrected because of what I brought forward. That's all documented in the project record. Silence. Then, "I've never looked at the project record." "No one told you to," I said. "Start with the file from the regional municipality. The original review outcome and the revised design are both public record. And the original submissions I made before I left, the timestamped ones, those are in the Harwick archive. I made sure of that before I signed anything." My brother didn't say much else that night, but I knew him. I knew the way his mind moved when something didn't sit right with him, the same way I'd known it when we were kids building things in the backyard out of whatever we could find. He would pull that thread until he understood the shape of what was underneath. He did. At my brother's party 2 weeks later, I had been on the back deck for almost an hour when the sliding door opened and he came out. He wasn't carrying food or a drink. He was just there, in his dress shirt with the collar open, looking like someone who had been carrying a weight for several days and had decided to stop pretending he wasn't. "Mr. Gallant is here," he said. I looked at him. "He's one of the clients Dad has been working to bring onto a new project. He arrived 20 minutes ago." My brother paused. "He asked about you." Dad was introducing him to the room and Mr. Gallant asked if this was the Harwick family, and then he said your name. We went inside together. The room shifted when I walked in. Not dramatically, the way a room shifts when something has changed its geometry without the furniture moving. My father was standing near the fireplace with Mr. Gallant and 2 of the firm's partners. Mr. Gallant was a large man with a white beard and the particular ease of someone who had spent decades in rooms like this without being impressed by any of them. He saw me across the room and his expression changed entirely. "There she is," he said, cutting cleanly through whatever my father had been about to say. He crossed the room in 4 steps and extended his hand. "Gemma, I had no idea this was your family's firm." "It's my father's firm," I said. "Well," he shook my hand firmly, with both of his the way he always had. "Your father must be enormously proud." The Queenston Project changed the conversation about what independent review can catch at the federal level. We've referenced your methodology in 3 subsequent project briefs. He glanced at my father, warm, collegial, entirely unaware of what he was detonating in that room. You raised a remarkable engineer. My father said nothing. His expression was a door that had been quietly, permanently closed. The room had the particular Canadian stillness of people deciding whether to pretend nothing had happened or to simply let a thing be what it was. A glass clinked somewhere near the back table. My mother stood near the far wall and did not move. Mr. Gallant, reading the room with the instincts of a man who had navigated federal bureaucracy for a quarter-century, said something gracious and general, asked my brother a question about the firm's current work, and moved the conversation forward with the skill of someone who understood that not every silence needs to be explained. Later, when the guests had thinned and the caterers were clearing the linens from the long table, I found my father in the kitchen. He was standing at the counter with his back to the room, and he didn't turn when I came in. What you heard out there, I said, is what has been true for 4 years. I did good work, people know it, it has nothing to do with you. He turned around. For the first time in a long time, I saw something in his face that wasn't calculation. Just a kind of hollowed-out quiet. He looked like someone standing in a room where a ceiling has come down and they're only just realizing there used to be something above them. The original submissions, he said, the soil review documentation. My brother pulled the project file from the archive, I said. I told him where to look. He didn't say anything. There was nothing that his version of the story could do with what the document said, and I think he understood that. The record was the record. The timeline was the timeline. A soil layer at 4 meters down doesn't care what the official version of events says. I'm not here to take anything from you, I said. I'm not interested in your firm or your clients or what this evening becomes in the retelling. I'm here because I wanted to be here when my brother got recognized for something he worked for. I looked at him steadily. And because I'm tired of that photograph on the mantle being the story we all pretend is true. I walked back outside. The October air was sharper now, the maple leaves brittle and bright against the string lights. My brother came out a few minutes later. We stood together without saying anything for a while. I filed a formal complaint with PEO this morning, he said finally. About the original project, about Blackwood, the record supports it. I looked at him. I know it'll be complicated, he said, for the firm, for the family. He turned to face me. He looked older than he had at the start of the evening and steadier. But I can't work in a place that operates like that, now that I know it does. I didn't try to talk him toward it or away from it. That was his. He was building his own understanding of what he could live with, and no one can do that for you. The Professional Engineers Ontario hearing took place 4 months later. The documentation was thorough. Blackwood's original internal communications were subpoenaed alongside my time-stamped submissions and the chain of formal escalations I had made before my resignation. The independent soil review record was entered in full. The outcome was a formal finding that the original escalation had been handled improperly and that material information had been withheld from the project file. Blackwood received a formal reprimand and a conditions order on his license. My father was not sanctioned. His involvement had been administrative rather than technical, but his name appeared in the written finding, and in an industry where reputation is built from paper, that had its own weight. My mother called the following week. Her voice was held together with the effort of maintaining composure as a form of dignity, something I recognized from my whole childhood. She said I had chosen my ambition over my family. I told her I had chosen the truth over a version of events that was comfortable for other people. We didn't agree. I hadn't expected we would. I ended the call and sat in my apartment looking out at the Ottawa River and let myself feel the full size of that loss. Not the anger, the grief underneath the anger, the loss of the family I had kept quietly hoping we might become. It was real. It was specific. I don't think it goes away. My brother transferred to a federal infrastructure role 3 months later. We have lunch most Thursdays near the Byward Market, soup and a sandwich, arguing about the senators or whatever infrastructure bill is stuck in committee. We don't talk about our parents often. When we do, we're honest about it. We're both still working out what it means to hold grief for people who are alive and have chosen to remain strangers. In the spring, I started a new project, a highway interchange rehabilitation in northern Ontario, communities that hadn't had serious infrastructure attention in 20 years. The first site visit was in April, when the roads up there were still half frozen and the spruce trees were holding their breath for the thaw. I drove in early, parked on the shoulder, walked out onto the existing bridge structure to look at the condition before anyone else arrived. The river below was running fast with snowmelt. The steel was cold under my bare hands. I thought about my father's office. The pen I picked up, the clay layer at 4 meters that no one wanted to see. I thought about Mr. Gallant shaking my hand in a room full of people who suddenly had to revise what they thought they knew. I thought about Dr. Mercer asking me if it was worth it and me saying I didn't know yet. Standing there in the early morning with the river running and a new project in front of me, I thought that maybe the worth of a thing isn't something you calculate once and lock in. Maybe it accumulates the way interest does, quietly, in increments, in ways you're not always watching. You make the right call at a worksite in February. You find the flaw underneath the cladding that no one thought to look for. You put your name on work that is honest, even when honest work costs you something. No one gives you credit for it at the time. Sometimes no one gives you credit at all, but the foundation holds, and the calculation is correct, and the bridge stands, and that is a form of permanence that does not need a photograph on a mantle to be real. I pulled my collar up against the wind and walked to the far end to begin the condition assessment. There was work to do. There was always work to do, and it was mine, and I was good at it, and that, finally, solidly, without apology, was enough.